My mother demanded I drop everything to take care of her, screaming, "A child's duty is to serve their parent." When I refused, she called the family, wailing, "She's abandoning me in my old age." But the day she showed up at my house expecting to move in, she didn't expect to find it already sold, and the look on her face when she realized she had no control over me anymore was absolutely priceless. I'm an only child. My father died when I was 17, but even before that, my mom treated me like I was born to serve her. I don't mean chores. I mean everything. I was her emotional support system, her punching bag, her little soldier. She constantly said, "A child's duty is to serve their parent." It was her favorite phrase, and she meant it. If I cried, she'd say I was being dramatic. If I was sick, I was faking it. If I wanted to spend time with friends, I was being selfish. She didn't care about my feelings, my goals, or what I wanted to do with my life. Everything revolved around her. I got out when I left for college. I went to Indiana University. I stayed in the dorms, worked part-time, and avoided going home during holidays as much as I could. She'd call me almost every day. Guilt trips. Complaints. Constant drama. If I didn't answer, she'd leave long voicemails crying and talking about how I didn't love her. One time she called the campus police to do a wellness check because I didn't answer my phone for a day. I moved to Louisville, Kentucky after graduation. Got a job. Saved up. Bought a small house in a quiet suburb. For the first time in my life, I had space. I could breathe. I kept low contact. I called every couple weeks. I helped her with bills sometimes. But I kept my distance. That didn't sit well with her. It wasn't anything huge. Arthritis, some blood pressure stuff, early signs of osteoporosis. Normal aging. But she acted like she was dying. She started hinting she wanted to live with me. Said her house was too much to manage. Said she felt lonely. I offered to help her hire a cleaner or a part-time nurse. That wasn't what she wanted. She wanted me. She wanted to move into my house, into my life, and take over again. Just like when I was a kid. One night she called me and just told me she was moving in. No discussion. No asking. She said, "Start clearing out your guest room. I'll need space for my recliner and TV. I can't keep doing everything myself. I raised you, now it's your turn." I told her that wasn't going to happen. I said I loved her, but I wasn't her caregiver. I said my home wasn't equipped for someone with mobility issues, and I didn't have the time or skills to take care of her full-time. That's when she exploded. "You owe me. I gave you life. You wouldn't have a roof over your head if IT wasn't for me. You don't have children. You don't even have a husband. What are you even doing with your life? A child's duty is to serve their parent." I hung up. She called back 10 times. I blocked her number for the night just to sleep. Over the next week, I started getting calls and messages from relatives. People I hadn't talked to in years. My aunt. My cousin. Even some random uncle I barely knew. They all said the same thing. "Your mom says you're abandoning her. She's crying every night. She says you're cold and ungrateful." I tried explaining, but most didn't want to hear it. They said I was her only child. That it was my responsibility to step up. One cousin said, if my mom asked to move in, I'd build her a whole wing. I wanted to scream. Where were these people when I was a teenager cooking dinner every night and crying in the bathroom? Where were they when she screamed at me until 2 a.m. over dishes? I sent her an email. I wrote it carefully. I said I'd help find her care. I'd help financially if she needed. But I wasn't able to move her into my home. I said we could talk once she calmed down. She didn't respond to the email. 3 days later, she texted me. "Be there Friday with the truck. Get your guest room cleared." She was just ignoring everything I said. Then, somehow, she got my neighbor's phone number. She called my neighbor and asked if the driveway was big enough for a moving truck. Said she was moving into her daughter's house soon. My neighbor texted me, "Hey, is your mom moving in? She said she's arriving this weekend." I felt like I was going to throw up. She was really going to show up. I called my best friend sobbing. I couldn't believe this was happening. She looked me in the eye and said, "You know what you have to do." She was right. So I made a decision. I was done playing defense. If my mother wanted to force her way into my life, I was going to make damn sure she had nowhere to land. I took the rest of the week off work. I called a realtor. The housing market was still hot. I listed on a Monday. A couple with 2 kids saw it on Wednesday and made a cash offer on Thursday. I accepted. I didn't even try to negotiate. I just wanted out. I packed up everything I needed, donated what I didn't, and booked a small moving company. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in Lexington, about an hour and a half away. Quiet neighborhood. Gated entry. Lease signed under my LLC name. I didn't tell a soul. I changed my phone number. I changed my email. I put a mail forwarding service in place and got a P.O. box. I updated my address with work, the bank, and my health providers, but nowhere else. I deleted my old social media accounts and started fresh with fake names. No photos. No locations. I even had my friend take photos of me standing next to sold signs and post them on her Instagram to make it look like I had moved out of state. I became a ghost. And then I waited. My old neighbor, the same one she called earlier, texted me. "You won't believe what just happened." She said my mom showed up in a rental van, her recliner crammed in the back, wearing a huge sun hat and sunglasses like she was starring in a movie about herself. She had a hired mover with her. She marched up to the front door and rang the bell like she owned the place. A young couple opened the door. My mom looked confused. She asked, "Is my daughter inside?" The couple told her, "We bought this house last week." Apparently, my mom went into full meltdown mode. Screaming, crying, accusing them of lying. "This is my daughter's house. She's expecting me. Where is she?" They tried to explain, but she wouldn't leave. The husband called the police. According to my old neighbor, when the police got there, she was still standing on the porch screaming. Not even yelling real words at that point, just sounds. Like her whole brain was short-circuiting. The cop asked for ID. She tried to show her medical records. She told them I lived there, and they needed to get these strangers out. The officer calmly explained that the couple owned the house now, that I had sold it legally. My mother froze. Then she said, "No, she wouldn't. She wouldn't sell without telling me." The officer repeated, "You don't live here anymore. Your daughter doesn't either." Then she got that look, I know it well, the look she used to get when I disobeyed her. Tight mouth, glazed eyes, silent rage. She whispered, "She thinks she's smarter than me." Then she sat on the porch and refused to leave. They gave her 10 minutes to call someone. She didn't. They threatened to remove her. Eventually, she got back in the van and left, but not before shouting that she was going to fix this. 3 days later, my cousin Kevin, who I hadn't spoken to in years, sent me an email. The subject line was just, "What the hell did you do?" Somehow, she'd gotten to them again. She told everyone I'd kicked her out onto the street. Said I was mentally unstable. Said I'd sold the family home behind her back. For the record, it wasn't the family home. I bought it myself. She never paid a dime. But details never mattered to her, just the story she could tell. The emails kept coming. One relative asked if I was on drugs. Another said I was possessed by demons of pride. The messages got angrier. More personal. At one point, my uncle actually wrote, "If your father could see you now, he'd be ashamed." That one hurt more than I want to admit. But I didn't respond. I deleted every message. Blocked every number. Then something even more disturbing happened. I'd told no one where I lived. Not even my best friend, Sarah. But Sarah called me a week after the porch incident, freaking out. Apparently, my mother had shown up at her workplace. She went inside and calmly asked the receptionist if Sarah was available. When the front desk said she was busy, my mother left her a note. It said, "Tell her I forgive her. I know this wasn't her idea. She's being controlled." Sarah called me crying. She was scared. My mom had driven over 90 miles to get there. That's when I knew I hadn't gone far enough. Later that week, I got a knock at my apartment door. It was a man in a windbreaker holding a clipboard. He said he was from a health survey group, looking to ask me some questions. I said no thanks and closed the door. Something about it felt off. I looked out the peephole. He stood there a moment longer than necessary, then left. The next day, there was a voicemail on my work phone from someone claiming to be Mr. Anderson, asking for clarification about your recent move for insurance purposes. I don't use my work phone for personal stuff. That's when it clicked. She'd hired someone. A PI or someone pretending to be one. Probably used money she didn't have. I got a VPN. Deleted my new email and made a fresh one with no connection to my name. Paid for a mail forwarding service in a totally different state. Changed my car's registration to an LLC address. Started paying cash for groceries. Told my job not to give out any information under any circumstances. I even changed my name slightly on delivery apps, just in case. I stopped going to places I used to. New coffee shop. New grocery store. Different gas station. I erased myself. Again. This is where things took a turn I didn't see coming. I grew up going to a small church in Bloomington. I stopped going when I left for college, but I knew everyone there. They were like extended family. One Sunday, I got a letter. No return address. Just a plain envelope, handwritten. Inside was a photocopy of a church bulletin. On the back page was a prayer request from my mother. Please pray for my daughter, who has lost her way and fallen into darkness. She is rejecting her family and Jesus. Pray that the evil spirit clouding her judgment will be lifted. I almost laughed. Almost. Then I flipped the page. She'd attached a photo of me from my college graduation. My full name, the town I used to live in, a brief bio that was basically a guidebook for anyone looking for me. She had broadcast my identity across half the county. I was shaking. About a month after that bulletin went out, weird things started happening. Someone keyed Sarah's car outside her apartment. Just a single word. Truth. Another friend said someone knocked on their door and left an open Bible on the mat. Then a letter arrived at my old P.O. box. It wasn't signed. Just a printed paragraph. You cannot run from what is owed. Blood is blood. Your mother will not be silenced. I reported it, but with no signature and no direct threat, the police couldn't do much. At that point, I wasn't scared. I was furious. She didn't just want me back. She wanted me controlled, owned, silenced. She wanted me crawling back in shame. And she would burn the ground under me to make that happen. I was walking out of the grocery store one morning when I saw a gray sedan parked at the edge of the lot. Driver's window down. Woman behind the wheel, sunglasses, lips pressed together tight. I froze. She was watching me. I stared back. She didn't move. Didn't smile. Just watched. I didn't go to my car. I walked across the street and into a pharmacy and called a rideshare to pick me up and back. I watched through the glass as she slowly pulled away. No horn. No wave. Nothing. She knew I knew. I've never been dramatic. I hate courtrooms. I hate lawyers. I hate anything that feels like making a scene. But I couldn't live like this anymore. I called a family attorney. Explained everything. Showed the documents. The voicemail. The PI stunt. The church bulletin. He said, "This isn't caregiving. This is stalking. And it's escalating." He told me to start documenting everything. Dates. Times. License plates. Photos. Names. He said I might have to file a restraining order. I couldn't believe it. A restraining order against my own mother. But deep down, I knew it was time. So I started preparing to file the restraining order. My lawyer was building a case. I was gathering every message, letter, and weird encounter. But before I could file anything, I got another letter. Not from my mother. Not from family. This one came from a law firm in Indiana. Inside was a formal-looking letter claiming that my mother was suing me for elder abandonment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I read the page 5 times. Thought it was a joke. But it was real. She had actually gone to a lawyer and tried to make a legal case that I had emotionally tortured her by refusing to house her. It was a civil suit, no jail, but she was demanding damages. She wanted $75,000 for pain and suffering. She listed things like loss of comfort, trauma from housing insecurity, and spiritual damage caused by estrangement. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My lawyer looked at the complaint, scoffed, and said, "This is an intimidation tactic." He explained that she probably never expected to win. But she wanted to drag me through court. Scare me. Make me look bad in public. It was a game. Her game. Control through chaos. He recommended we countersue for harassment and seek a protection order anyway. I agreed. The court date was set 6 weeks out. But then, something shifted. One morning I got an email from a burner account. The subject line just said, "I want peace." Inside was a message from her. At first, it sounded like an apology. "I'm sorry things got out of hand. I never meant for it to go this far. Can we talk before lawyers get involved?" But the next paragraph gave her away. "I'm willing to drop the suit if you agree to a family mediation process. The church has offered to host. You can even bring your lawyer if you want. I just want to be back in your life." She was dangling her lawsuit like a threat while pretending to be a victim. Again, I didn't respond. 2 days later, the court received a motion to delay the hearing, filed by her side. She wanted more time. But I had a feeling she was up to something worse. A week later, I got a knock on the door. It was a woman in a brown coat, holding a clipboard. She said she was from Kentucky Family Support Services and that she needed to check on a report of potential elder neglect. She asked if I had a mother who had tried to move in with me recently. I felt sick. She had filed a complaint pretending I was responsible for her and had neglected her. And now this poor woman was stuck in the middle. I asked to see her credentials. She showed them. She was legit. I invited her in. Calmly explained everything. Showed her the emails, the PI visit, the lawsuit. Her eyes went wide. She said, "Oh wow." She closed the file and said she'd be noting that this was not a valid concern and that I was clearly not her caretaker in any legal or medical capacity. I thanked her. She apologized for the inconvenience. But that wasn't what shook me. It was the fact that my mother had weaponized the system. She was playing dirty. Real dirty. 2 nights later, my cousin Diane called from a restricted number. I didn't want to answer. But I did. She said, Listen, I'm not supposed to be calling. But you need to know something. Your mom's not alone in this. My stomach dropped. She continued, she's got a whole group behind her. It's her, Aunt Sharon, two of the women from church, and this guy named Pastor Greg. They've been meeting every Thursday night. They're calling it the Restoration Circle. They're trying to force you to return to the family. They said they're praying the devil out of you. But now they're planning something else. Something bigger. I didn't even know what to say. She said she didn't agree with it anymore, that it had gone too far, but she couldn't stop them. Before I could ask more, she hung up. This time I didn't wait. I went down to the local station. Sat with an officer. Told them everything, the stalking, the lawsuit, the fake report, the church group. They took a statement and said they'd be adding my case to a file they already had open because apparently I wasn't the first person to report one of the women in the group for harassment. They couldn't tell me details, but it wasn't just me. That changed everything. Now it wasn't just a crazy mother story. It was a pattern. The officer said if there were any more attempts to contact or harass me, to call immediately and they would escalate it. I walked out of that station half relieved, half terrified. Because now I knew something for sure. This wasn't just about her trying to move in anymore. This had turned into something cult-like. 3 days later, I got a stack of letters in my P.O. box. They were all from people I didn't know. Different addresses. Different handwriting. But every letter said the same thing. Your mother loves you. Return to her. She forgives you. God forgives those who return to their path. One even had a Bible verse highlighted and a gift card to Cracker Barrel taped to the inside. It was surreal. I showed them to my lawyer. He took photos. Called it evidence of coordinated emotional harassment. He said we had enough now to request a no-contact order with teeth. One that included third-party harassment. When the court date finally arrived, she showed up in a wheelchair. Hair wrapped in a scarf. Sunglasses. A Bible in her lap. She looked frail. Quiet. Like some wounded grandmother from a Hallmark movie. Her lawyer painted a picture of a poor elderly woman abandoned by her only child. Said she was desperate. Said she was heartbroken. They even tried to get her declared partially dependent, like I was legally obligated to take care of her. My lawyer tore it apart. We had everything. Emails. Photos. Witness statements. The social worker's file. The church bulletin. The letters from strangers. We showed the pattern. The manipulation. The stalking. The fake social work report. And then, something I hadn't expected. The judge looked at her and said, "This isn't elder abuse. This is emotional blackmail. This woman has done everything in her power to force control over someone else's life." Then he turned to me. "You have every right to live your life without fear." He granted the no-contact order, effective immediately. It included digital, in-person, and third-party contact. Violation would be criminal contempt. She didn't look at me as I walked out of the courtroom. But I glanced at her. And for the first time in my life, she looked small. Like the spell had broken. I thought it was over. No contact order in place. Legal wall between us. But 2 weeks later, I got a notification from the building's office. A package had been left for me. There was no return label. Just my name in big, shaky letters. Inside was a thick envelope. Inside that? A printed letter. 8 pages long. Each one filled with her handwriting. Not just words, please. She wrote that she forgave me. That she understood now. That she had been overcome by desperation and just wanted me to let God repair our bond. But the tone shifted halfway through. The next 4 pages were full of blame. You let outsiders poison your heart. You humiliated me in court. You were cold when I needed you. She wrote that she had prayed for my heart to soften before it was too late. At the end, she signed it with a single line: "A child's duty is to serve their parent." She had broken the no-contact order. Clear as day. I called my lawyer. He said we had to report it, but that this might be the final nail. And it was. I didn't expect to see her again. But 3 weeks later, I was invited to a funeral. One of the older members of our hometown church had passed, a man who'd been kind to me growing up. I debated not going. But in the end, I went quietly. Sat in the back. Wore black. Head down. Then, just as the service was ending, I heard a voice. "Is that her?" Then, louder. "That's her. That's the daughter who abandoned her own mother." People turned. It was Pastor Greg. The same one from her Restoration Circle. He was glaring at me from across the room, fire in his eyes. My mother was beside him, in a wheelchair, holding a tissue like a saint on stage. And then, she stood up. No limp. No cane. Just stood. The room fell silent. She pointed at me and said, loud and shaking, "How could you walk away from the woman who raised you? After all I did? I gave you everything. I sacrificed for you. And you let me rot like I was trash. I didn't move. She took a step forward. Then another. Then she screamed. She sold my house from under me. She left me homeless. She let the devil in. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "What's going on?" The pastor tried to pull her back. She pushed his hand away. "You think you're better than me now? With your apartment and your new friends and your fake peace? You're nothing without me." I finally spoke. Voice low. Calm. "You don't get to rewrite history, Mom." She laughed. "Rewrite? I made your life. You owe me." I said nothing. I turned to the front of the church, where the casket sat. Then I turned back to her and said, slowly, "He was kind to me. You weren't. That's why I came. That's why you don't get to control me anymore." Her mouth dropped open. Then she sat back down. Shaking. Not crying. Just stunned. I walked out. I didn't look back. Outside, an old woman I barely recognized caught up with me. Wrinkled hands. Blue coat. She touched my arm. I heard what she did. She said softly, "You're not crazy. You're brave." Then she walked away. I got into my car and just sat there. Hands on the wheel. Heart pounding. I wasn't sure if I felt strong or broken or something in between. That night, I cried harder than I had in years. Not because I regretted it, but because the final thread had snapped. There would be no fixing it. No miracle change. I had stood up in front of people who used to pat me on the head and hand me Bible verses, and I had said no. 2 days later, my cousin Diane messaged me. She said my mother had gone on a full redemption tour after the church scene. She's telling people she was set up. That the whole thing was a performance taken out of context. She's saying she was spiritually ambushed. Some people believe her. Some don't. But the damage was done. Even Pastor Greg stopped pushing. The group disbanded. And I never heard from most of them again. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from a retirement facility in southern Indiana. It was a brochure. Inside was a post-it note with one line, "I'm where you wanted me. Are you happy now?" No signature. I didn't respond. I didn't call. I shredded it and dropped the pieces in 3 different trash cans over 3 days. People like my mother don't change. They don't wake up one day and say, "I was wrong." They say they're hurt when you stop playing their game. They say you betrayed them, when really, you just stopped handing them the knife. I'm not proud of everything I did. I wish I'd been stronger sooner. I wish I hadn't wasted years hoping she'd change. But I'm proud of one thing. I got out. I sold the house she thought was her kingdom. I walked away from the family who only saw me as her shadow. And I chose myself. Not out of anger. Out of survival.